For the binding, place the binding along the edge of your journal cover on the inside. Then take the end, fold it diagonally like this, and pin in place. The pin should be placed along the fold line on the binding. When you do this, make sure that the edge of the binding doesn't slip off the edge of the journal cover. It's better to be a little bit inside rather than pushing the binding a little bit off the edge. Then when you get to the end, put a pin in sideways, about 1/4 inch from the end. When we do the binding, we'll be pinning and sewing one side at a time. Sew along the fold line on the binding. You'll need to do this with a walking foot on. While you're sewing, make sure the binding doesn't slip off the edge of the journal cover. If you sew too close to the edge, it can fray the fabric. When you get near the end, stop at the pin that you put in sideways, about 1/4 inch from the end. When you turn the corner, fold the binding to create a 45-degree angle, just like this. Then, put a pin to hold it in place. The angle should go right up into the corner of the journal cover. Then fold the binding over again to run along the next edge of the journal cover. Then put pins in along the fold line. And again, when you get to the end, put a pin in sideways 1/4 inch in from the edge. Continue sewing each side the same way. Make sure you are sewing in the fold line and it's not slipping off the edge. To finish, the binding will need to overlap the beginning part. Continue pinning it in the fold line, making sure it doesn't slip off the edge. You will need to cut the binding so that it only overlaps just over the beginning section. Match the folds up so that they are sitting together and pin in place. Then sew over the overlapping sections of binding to finish it off. At the ironing board, iron the binding ends together like this. Then iron the binding out around the edge of the journal cover. You can push it out with the pointy end of the iron. Fold the binding around to the front of the journal cover and pin in place. While you're pinning it, try and make the corners sit nicely. They should sit at an angle. Use the iron to make sure the joint in the binding sits nice as well. Then, looking at the front of the journal cover, sew the binding in place with a fancy stitch, using the walking foot. At the corners, put the needle down and pivot. And now you will be finished your journal cover. Congratulations!